Hello and welcome to the second SolidWorks tutorial, and in this one I'm going to be talking all about sketching. Got a lot of options here. I'll go through some of these simpler ones, and we're going to be making some more sketches that are well defined and easy to edit. So let's get started. First off, we're going to, in a new document, just open up a sketch in the Sketch tab, create a sketch here. Again, it doesn't really matter for the time being which plane we decide to use. I'll just go with the top plane, and you can see it appearing right over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make a rectangle. Pretty simple, and you'll notice all the sides are blue, which is important to note for now. That will change in the future. If they're selected, if they're being hovered over, they'll be orange. If they're selected, they'll change to light blue. So we can drag this all around. You can click on edges or vertices, move it wherever we need to. Now, when I'm making a sketch, I actually prefer to mount it to something solid, like the origin. Or if you already have some 3D geometry in here, I like to connect it to that, rather than just having it float, float around. It's better if it's more defined. So if we wanted to put it on the origin, one thing we can do is just click and drag it onto the origin. Bang. And we'll notice that now some of these edges are black. This is a good thing. That means they're fully defined. They're not going to move. We click and drag these edges, they're not going anywhere. Their length is not defined, but their position is. So what we want is actually for the whole sketch to be black instead of blue. That means it'll be fully defined. Fully defined sketch is what we want. So when we dragged it to the origin, we've got a black line shown up here. We also noticed this little this square show up that wasn't there before when we first drew the rectangle. So I'll talk about these. These are relations. We'll get to relations. That's one way to define your sketch. Another way is with the Smart Dimension tool, which actually I'm going to talk about first. So we want to make this whole thing black. We're just going to use the Smart Dimension tool. So we click on it, we can click on a line, and we can set the dimension. So you just click on it, click again on where you want that number to sit, and then I'll just make this 1 inch. And you'll notice now we have one more black line. That one can't move anymore because it's got to stay 1 inch away from the other line. And so you notice I clicked on this line to set the dimension. Another way you could do it is you could click on 2 points. And it'll set the distance between those 2 points. This time I'll make this 2 inches. And there's our rectangle. And it's all fully defined, and that's good. That's what we want. So Smart Dimension did the trick. Now, why do we call it Smart Dimension? I mean, does that imply that there's some type of dumb dimension? Well, sort of. Back before we had the Smart Dimension tool, there were lots of different dimension tools. And you can kind of still have that today. If you click on this arrow, we can see different types of dimensions. But it used to be that we had to know what type of dimension we wanted to use before you clicked on which dimension tool. There were lots of different dimension tools. And so if you wanted to set a radius, you couldn't use a point-to-point dimension. You had to use a radius dimension. And if we wanted to set an angle, if we had these two lines, if we had 2 lines and we wanted to set an angle, we had to select the angle dimension tool. The Smart Dimension tool can do all of that. So I did a line length, I did distance between 2 points. I could click on 2 lines and it knows that that means I want an angle. I could set this angle to be whatever I'd like. I could click on this circle and I could give it the diameter. It's very versatile. I could even click on these 2 points, get the distance between them, but I can move my mouse around. I can get the vertical distance, I can get the horizontal distance, or the straight line distance. So Smart Dimension tool is very powerful, and it's a lot easier than having to decide what kind of dimension you want every time. So nice little tool right there. It's actually a lot of tools wrapped up into one. And now I'm going to just get rid of these. So if you right click, you can delete them. Also, if you double click on the number, you can edit it to whatever you want. And now we're back to where we were before. We've got this corner is free to move, and this one is stuck. We put it on the origin. We dragged it to the origin, but we can't drag it away from the origin. Jesus, cannot drag. And that's because of this little green square. This is a relation. It automatically made this whenever we dragged it to the origin. You'll notice we also have some other relations, actually. These were automatically made when we did the rectangle. You notice every time you make a rectangle, it adds those green squares. This just means vertical. If you hover over the relation, it will highlight in purple which line it references. So this line is vertical, this line is horizontal, and then this is vertical, that's horizontal. This one over here is coincident. See, it says coincident. And what that just means is it intersects or it overlaps at a point. And so this vertex of the rectangle is coincident with the origin. So it's stuck there on the origin. We didn't have to put those in. It automatically knew that when we dragged those 2 points together. It decided we wanted a coincident point. And these were also created automatically. We didn't have to put those in there manually. But if you want to, and there are many times you will have to, create one manually, you can click on a feature, and over here with the properties, under the Add Relations title, we've got some options. We already have the horizontal one applied, so if we apply it, I mean, it's not going to do anything. If we say vertical, we'll get an error, because it can't do that. It can't be horizontal and vertical. So we have to choose one or the other. So let's just delete that vertical constraint. We could also fix this. I don't particularly like the fix constraint, but you'll notice it turned it black. That just means it's fully defined. We can't move this line around anymore. The reason I don't like it is because I would rather fix this using dimensions rather than just saying don't move. So if we want to get rid of it, you can click on it and just hit delete. And it's gone. We can move that line again. Okay, so another useful constraint we can do, if we select one and then hit Control as we select another line, we can select both at the same time, and now you can see we have more options if we have multiple lines selected. Collinear, perpendicular, parallel, and equal are all options now. We won't really be able to do these three, but equal we can. If we hit equal, now no matter what we do, we can't make these lines unequal. It'll always keep them equal, which is nice because now we have a square. If we didn't use relations, if we delete these, if we wanted it to be a square, we would have to set this to be 1 inch, and then we would have to set this to be 1 inch. But if we decided later that we actually want a 2-inch square, we'd have to double click on this. That's 2 inches, and then also change this to be 2 inches. And now it's a square again. But what's nice is if we get rid of one of these, and we set these two lines to be equal, then all we need to do is change this one number, and it's still a square. We didn't have to go and change both side lengths. Sometimes you would want independent control of both side lengths, and it's not a really big deal on a simple sketch like this, but as they get more complicated, it'll be a good idea to use relations to make sure that the sketch is set up so it's easy to edit. So if we know we always want a square, I would just go ahead and use the equal length rather than setting both dimensions. I can also demonstrate with some more lines over here, some more constraints. So I'll select both of these, again using Control as I select. So say we want it to be collinear. Now there's nothing we can do to make these lines not collinear. They're always going to be collinear. If I undo that and decide I want instead them to be perpendicular, there's nothing I can do that will take these out of square. They're always going to be perpendicular, no matter how I move them, no matter how I dimension them. We've also got parallel, which in this case will look identical to collinear. But if I make this parallel to that, there we go. Now this one is always going to be vertical, because this is vertical and it's equal. It's parallel to this one. So it's not going to be able to rotate at all. Those are all of the linear relations. You'll also sometimes hear them called constraints. But there are some other ones you might see if you're working with circles and arcs. You'll notice we have fix there on that one, but if we select 2, we also get some other options like co-radial, which is similar to collinear, but rather than lying on the same line, they'll lie on the same chord. If I add another arc in here like that, right now these are just floating around. I can make them co-radial, and now they share the same center. So it's going to be very similar to if I were to make them concentric. Again, if I highlighted these, make them concentric, they're lying. They have the same center all the time, but not necessarily the same radius. Okay, here's another one. One of my favorites is tangent. We can make this tangent. Now, I just made them tangent, and you might say, well, they're not even touching. How can they be tangent? And SolidWorks will always treat an arc like this to be a full circle. So if you were to extend this arc, it would be tangent, and you can actually see that. If I wrap this around, see, it's tangent. But even if the arc isn't there, it's still tangent. I can move this around and notice how it's always tangent to the sort of invisible half of the arc, or the visible half. Tangent can also work between a arc or a circle and a line. Now you can see this is always going to be tangent to the line, but not necessarily the line, or it could be tangent to the extension of the line. Just like SolidWorks will sort of treat an arc as if it's a full circle, it'll also treat the line as if it's an infinite line when it comes to relations, at least. So I'll delete these. We don't need these floating around. We have our fully defined sketch, and I'm going to make one change to it. I'm going to delete this line, and you'll notice the equal constraint that we had is gone because we deleted this line. All the constraints attached to it are gone as well. And what I want sort of a loop on this side. So rather than a square, it'll look kind of like a sideways lock, maybe. And I'll use the center point arc for that. I'll just make an arc. It doesn't even have to really be in the right place. I can drag it around later. So I'll just drag these on top of each other. And now they're stuck. They're actually merged rather than coincident, so you don't see this little green box, but they're stuck together. They're not coming apart, which is what we want. That means we have a nice closed shape. And the only other thing I think I have to do is make these tangent, as well as these tangent, and now we've got this nice shape. And then we've got one more dimension to set, which is this length, total length here. Or I could make these equal if I want. In this case, I'll just set that length, make this 1.5 inches. And notice we don't have to say what the radius is on this circle, because it knows it has to be tangent on both sides. And so the radius has to be 1/2 inch. This is a nice clean sketch. We can clearly see what our important values are, our important measurements, and we can see where everything is constrained or related to each other. This is nice and editable if we need to. we can double click on any value, change it to whatever we want. The rest of the sketch just adapts to that, and we don't have to go back and fix anything that breaks. It all just moves together nicely the way it's related and dimensioned. I think I mentioned it already, but it's all black, which means it's fully defined. We can't drag anything anywhere. It's everything knows exactly where it's supposed to be, which is good. At this point, we can exit our sketch. Notice it's still flat. All we have to do here is go into Features and Extrude. Tell it where we want to extrude, how far we want to extrude it, and now we've got this nice part. This is not arbitrarily dimensioned like the last one was, where we just put random lines. Now we've actually got numbers and dimensions and relations. We can make this whatever size we want it to be, whatever shape we want it to be. So it's still a simple part, but this is a lot more valuable than just clicking lines around and making different shapes like that. So in the next tutorial, I'll be going more into the feature side. I'll be talking about more details about what this extrude does, also the revolve extrude and the sweep extrude. These are going to be the best ways to turn two-dimensional geometry into solid three-dimensional shapes. So I hope you join me for that next tutorial.